I've never learned QWERTY. So like I literally.
That's incredible. How did you know about Dvorak in first grade? Welcome back to another iteration of the Sourcegraph podcast. Today, I'm here with John Kodumal, CTO and co-founder of LaunchDarkly, the popular platform for managing feature flags and feature toggles. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time. So to kind of kick things off, what was your initial entry point into the world of computers? When did you get into programming?
Yeah, I started out with computers really young. So I'm, my age is going to come out at some point. And so at the time of this recording, I'm 43 years old. So I got into computers at an early age. And at an early age for me, we're talking about like the early 80s.
Nice.
So we're talking like war games era, just past a coupler modem into, but still in the like modem and BBS era for a lot of people.
Cool.
And my first computer was like an original IBM PC. It was really dating me. Like 5.25 disk drives, 256K of memory, like CGA graphics. And the deal was my dad bought it for my brother, who's 8 years older than me. And bought it for him for like typing and for school and stuff like this. And my brother like had no interest or desire to use it. And so I kind of just like,
Interesting.
I was like 6 years old or 7 years old. So like really young. I kind of just shoved him aside and was like, let me go at this. And so like, my dad had bought him a modem. It was like a 300 baud modem. And I was the one that like set it all up, like got, basically set the thing up and started using it. And then I quickly got into like the online world, which back in the day, as I mentioned, was like BBSs and like CompuServe was like kind of the first service that I was on.
What is a BBS and what was CompuServe for like, younger listeners who
this is great
don't know what that is.
So BBS is for bulletin board system. And basically what it was is it was a lot of like hobbyists. So these weren't companies. They were largely just like other individuals who were computer enthusiasts. And they had like a handful of modems that connected to a hosting service, their own personal computer that was set up as a hosting service. And literally like the number of people that could connect to your service was exactly the number of like external phone lines that you had. So like we're talking like you paid the phone company for like 6 phone lines and like 6 people was like the maximum number of concurrent users on your board. And each board had like a mix of like files that you could download, which could be like images or like honestly like a lot of pirated content like games and stuff. And then message boards where like people formed some of the earliest online communities.
That's awesome. So it's kind of like a combination like file server / chat system.
Yeah. And then there started being like these online collaborative games called Doors. It was a really cool experience. It was a really early time, and the people that were into it tended to be the people that like just had a lot of common interests, in computers or other things like lockpicking, the MIT Guide to Lockpicking. Like that was like one of the most popular files, and like you come into school with like dot matrix printouts of your MIT Guide to Lockpicking or like anarchist or other content like that.
Man, early internet. That's really cool. So did that get you into programming at all, or were you strictly like kind of an end user of the internet and computers in those days?
Yeah, so this is all really dating me, but like my first exposure to programming was BASIC. And my first actual exposure to it was you could go to the bookstore, and now like bookstores are barely a thing, but like you go to a bookstore and you could buy a printed out BASIC programs, like, and basically you would like bring that book home and you would just type in the entire program from
before GitHub. You would literally buy a book and type in the program. That's amazing.
Yeah, the workflow sucked, but it was all you had, right? So you go to the bookstore, you buy like a printout of like these BASIC programs, and mostly they were games. And you type them all in, and debugging was like you with like the printout and the, what you coded in, and like you're just looking at them side by side and going like, where did I screw up the logic here? Wow. And that was my first exposure to programming. But then from there, like as I grew older, as I got into like middle school and beyond, like I started getting into real programming. Like I think Turbo Pascal was probably the first programming language. I got like Turbo Pascal for Windows. So it's like doing Windows programming back in the day. And then eventually, like in college, that was like when I first took an actual programming class, but I'd done a ton on my own.
That's awesome. Do you remember, like, was there anything in particular that sticks out in your mind that you built in Turbo Pascal for Windows during your middle school, high school years?
Not in Turbo Pascal, but so I had, in high school, I had a TI-92, you know, the TI calculator. Like
graphing calculator?
Yeah, the graphing calculators.
The 92 sounds pretty intense. Was that one of the ones with
full-on QWERTY keyboard?
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great because it did all of your calculus for you. You could just do all.
I think those were banned. Those were contraband at my school. Ridiculous.
And so I had the TI-92. I was like the one with the kid with the TI-92 while everybody had the TI-82 or whatever. And I built a reverse Polish notation shell for it.
No kidding.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
There was always like the TI people versus the, like, I forget what there was another competing calculator. It wasn't
like Casio or something like that.
Yeah, somebody, but like their whole thing was like theirs was in RPN and TI's were not in RPN. And I was like, RPN.
What is RPN?
Reverse Polish notation.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. Yeah.
So yeah, it's like you enter 5, you enter 4, and then you hit plus, and then it's like.
Yep.
And so I was like, well, I want the best of both worlds. And so I built a new like interface for the TI-92 that put everything into like RPN mode. So like basically it was like a stack calculator that I built for the TI-92.
Cool. So you preferred reverse Polish notation when it came to like arithmetic and things like that?
I've always been an odd person when it comes to like
it means you're a robot. I think you're a robot.
I always try to find the thing that's like a little alt or like a little bit of like what people are not doing. Like we talked about this, but like when I was in first grade with that IBM PC, I taught myself Dvorak. So when I taught myself typing, I've never learned QWERTY. So like I literally.
That's incredible. How did you know about Dvorak in first grade? Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. So I was like, well, this is highly inefficient, right? Because like the whole backstory, which I think is not.
Yeah.
The whole backstory.
I've heard it's apocryphal. Yeah.
Yeah, this is designed for the QWERTY layout was designed for manual keyboards to avoid jamming, and so I was like, yeah, like Dvorak, that makes more sense. And so I learned Dvorak, and I never learned QWERTY.
That's incredible. Do you know what is your typing speed? Do you know it off the top of your
head? I think because it's not actually better, right? Because it turns out that you're optimizing the wrong function. It's not the amount of travel your fingers have. It's like alternation is more important because alternating is faster than moving small muscles in one hand.
Yep. Okay, cool. So you got started very young. You're very self-taught. What was it like going into college and taking your first quote unquote like real programming class there? What was that transition like?
It was interesting because it brought a formality to something that had formerly been a hobby. And whenever you do that, it's sort of like, am I going to lose the passion of this? Is it going to go from something that I have like an intellectual curiosity about into like a chore? And to my surprise and happiness, it absolutely didn't do that. I was so excited. In fact, when I entered undergrad, I went to Harvey Mudd, which is an engineering focused school in Southern California. And I actually went in as an engineering major, and I thought I'll keep computers as my hobby because I'm so excited about them. I don't want it to be that like the thing that I do for work. And then as I got more into the curriculum, I was sort of like, I had to make a choice between taking more programming classes and taking more engineering and engineering math courses. Yeah. And I was sort of like, well, at the end of the day, if I get through this program and I get my degree and there's like a whole bunch of stuff that I could never learn because like I just didn't have access to those classes, I would feel really disappointed. Like I just that like curiosity and drive, like I really got more and more excited about what I was learning. Like when I took theory of computation and learned about like state machines and like finite state machines and like automata and like Turing machines, it just unlocked this like level of curiosity around computer science that was just even deeper than what I had before. And at that point I was like, I really have to major in this because like I can't imagine ever exhausting the like body of knowledge and feeling like I wasn't excited about this anymore. And so that went to me completing my undergrad in computer science and then going straight from undergrad into grad school in computer science.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What was your, was there like a domain? So when you went to grad school, you did a PhD there. What was your kind of specialization? Was there a particular part of computer science that, kind of drew you into that?
Yeah. So as an undergrad, the class that I enjoyed the most, absolutely thoroughly loved, the two classes that I loved were formal logic and programming languages. And so the languages class was really cool. We, in that class at Harvey Mudd at the time, you basically built an interpreter in SML. So you programmed in SML. So you got to learn functional programming, which has been it's something that I've always been really excited about. And you got to build.
Is that a variant of ML, SML?
Yeah, ML, standard ML is just one variant of.
Okay, got it.
Standard
Cool.
SML, New Jersey, whatever. And then later on, I learned OCaml, which is like another variant of ML.
It's a very mathy language.
Yeah, they're great. So I fell in love with functional programming. I fell in love with compilers and interpreters and the process of creating languages. And so then when I went to grad school, that coupled with hey, I'm really interested in formal logic. I started to get really excited about programming languages. I actually started out my grad school degree in human computer interaction. But the way that I bridged that was I was working on visual programming languages. So I was thinking about programming languages but from a human computer interaction or interaction design perspective. And I was thinking about ways to bring visual programming into the world. And then eventually, even in that, I was like, I'm actually really a lot more interested in the formal process of the formality of programming languages. And so then I just shifted into programming languages and did my specialization in programming languages.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. But are you familiar with any of the I know there was a one project out of MIT that was kind of teaching kids how to program using a visual grammar of sorts. I'm blanking on the name, but projects like that.
Yeah, there's a handful of those. I wasn't really directly involved in them. There's a bunch of Scheme variants where they sort of teach you Scheme by exposing. I think it's Dr. Scheme. I think Matthias Feleisen's work, maybe. I'm not 100% sure I have that right, but I was peripherally familiar with that work, and it's always been something that's interesting to me. That was actually the first set of projects that I did around visual programming was around expression editors and trying to create expression editors that would work for non-technology folks. So I started doing user studies where I would show these recursive expression builders to non-programmers, just lay people, people that were doing whatever, a piano teacher, and just seeing if I get them to understand the concepts of recursion and things like that. It turns out that was really hard on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, I feel like recursion is one of those intellectual leaps that you take when you're first learning into programming. It kind of, at least for me, it was one of those things where it just clicks at some point. It's very difficult to grasp the concept until you finally get it, and it's tricky. What do you think of, I feel like in the past year or so, maybe 2 years, there's just been this huge wave of low code and no code tools. It's become a huge trend now. What do you make of that? Is the time for visual programming and is kind of light syntactical, feels like programming, but maybe is not what we traditionally think of as programming at a terminal or something like that. Is that something that is still kind of keeps your interest, or have you used any of them? What do you think of them?
Yeah, we're customers of Retool, which is one of the more popular low code platforms. Cool. I think what's interesting to me as a languages practitioner, someone who's really interested in programming languages, is all of the workflow around change management in programming languages is really good at this point. Very good. Git, Git flow, the idea of collaborating pull requests, merging changes in or reverting changes, rolling them back. that has gotten really mature for traditional programming languages. And I think that's probably one of the directions that those domains need to explore is like, how can you regain a lot of that power, that workflow in a non-text-based code world? Because I think at the end of the day, a lot of that tooling is based fundamentally on code being stored as text, right?
Yeah.
And probably most of that comes from Git operating on text files. And so I think it'd be fascinating to sort of like figure out how to support those types of workflows like pull requests, rollbacks, change management, audit logging in a low code world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like there's this interesting maybe like intersection between quote unquote low code and developer tools where like you said, a lot of developers I feel like a lot of times what you're essentially doing in a low code or no code tool is coding in a way, right? You're writing logic and connecting that to components. And then, members of the development team will sometimes get involved in that as well, especially when there's like a more complex piece of logic that needs to be added. But then it's like certain things are much easier, much nicer, but then you miss a lot of the developer experience, like you said, change management and other sorts of things that you have from the development side. So I wonder if those lines will start to blur in the next couple of years as this kind of like cross pollination happens.
Yeah, I think that's probably the direction it has to go, right? Because you need an escape hatch into like a full blown Turing complete language at times, right?
Yeah.
And then you also like the reason change management is valuable. It's valuable to the business. It's not just about developers making them more productive. Like it's incredibly important to be able to roll back change, to be able to track change. And if you can't do those things, you're kind of, you're kind of in trouble. You've lost a lot.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you graduated the PhD in programming languages. And what was the journey like from that to eventually starting LaunchDarkly? Because it feels like feature toggles, it's a bit far afield from, just like the very specific domain of static analysis and programming languages. What was that journey like? What brought you in the direction of feature management and feature toggling?
Yeah, the first step of that was deciding that I was done with academia. Like I didn't want to become a professor. So I got the PhD and I immediately started looking for opportunities on the commercial side to do what I was doing, but to try to actually work at a company that was selling that as a product. And there were very few companies doing that at the time. This was around 2007 or so, 2006. And so I joined a company called Coverity, which was amazing. They were some researchers out of Stanford, out of the programming languages groups at Stanford, Dawson Engler, Andy Chalice, Seth Hallam, and a bunch of other folks, incredibly talented researchers that were commercializing this technology that was around finding defects in software automatically, using a lot of the mathematical rigor and the techniques that we were developing in the programming languages research community, things like type systems. So, most people are familiar with type systems. If they're programmers, they're using like Java, and there's a type system that helps you eliminate certain classes of invalid programs. And so we were kind of taking that another level and saying like, well, what if you could annotate programs and use those annotations to assert things about the state of the program, and then use techniques to validate or invalidate or prove or disprove the existence of certain kinds of bugs. So for example, like buffer overflows in C or null pointer exceptions, can you statically prove, before a program is running, can you statically prove that a null pointer exception won't happen? And most of the like static analysis out in the world is really it's really not static. I wouldn't call it static analysis. It's just like sort of like really super simple stuff, right? Like doesn't even really understand flow, let alone like what a function call is and the procedural analysis. And the stuff we were doing at Coverity was really, really innovative stuff. I was pulling stuff out of my thesis and commercializing it, which was an amazing and very rare experience. I'm extremely grateful for that. So I worked there for 3 years, built a lot of really cool stuff. We did a lot of really, really novel stuff. Some of the technology that Coverity built around like understanding and introspecting on builds, I think is like state of the art even today. I did some stuff on like detecting race conditions dynamically in Java programs. So like you would run a Java program, and it would the stuff we built would instrument that Java program and just spit out races that were occurring. That was really cool stuff. Incredibly slow though. It like slowed programs down by like 10 or 20 or something like that, and like doubled or quintupled the memory footprint or something like this. So very academic stuff, but we were still finding applications for it. From there, I got really interested in understanding how to make developers' lives better, not through technology per se, but through collaboration, making them work more efficiently. And so I joined Atlassian after that, and I spent 6 years at Atlassian. And Atlassian was where I learned a ton about how to build a company, how to run teams, how to scale teams, and more importantly, like what it really took to like make teams more productive. I think one of the things that I was really blessed with throughout my career is I got to, at Coverity and Atlassian, I got to talk to a lot of customers. I got to talk to a lot of engineering teams, and I could see how they were building software, and I could diagnose patterns and see what was working and what wasn't working. Those were really formative experiences in my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. Coverity, from what I know of the company, it seems like such like cool technology, and it feels like one of those companies that maybe there's like we're overdue for like a new wave of that, because like you said, I feel like when we talk about static analysis in the popular imagination, like JavaScript or whatever, a lot of the rules are still fairly like shallow, whereas Coverity was doing like deep like multi-layer analysis and surfacing these like bugs by analyzing the control flow graph, and got really deep into these like Java and C++ programs. Do you feel like that sort of thing will ever like make a comeback in the web application world, or like in the world of more web-based or like modern programming languages?
I think perhaps. I think that there are some critical issues that need to be resolved in that domain. First, from like a more workflow perspective, most of those analyses are not incremental in nature, and they're incredibly expensive. Some of the stuff we were doing at Coverity, like analyzing the Linux code base, would take, I don't know, I can't remember, like 36 hours on compute at the time, which, computers have gotten faster, but not that faster. And so in a modern engineering organization where you have hundreds of engineers working, in a DVCS workflow where you've got branches and everybody's operating on independent branches, and if you have to do a 36-hour analysis for each change from scratch, that's not really a fly. What you really need is to be able to store analysis results incrementally and then apply deltas and have that be cheap to do true incremental analysis. So I think from a workflow perspective, that technical challenge has to be solved. I also think that one of the fundamental problems with static analysis is explaining results to end users in a way that makes sense. The more sophisticated type systems you have, the more difficult it is to explain to an end user how you got that result and give them the ability to take action, especially when those type systems or those analyses are imperfect and can have false positives. That was a constant challenge with the technology. It's sort of like, all right, you're explaining this chain of reasoning that involves like 15 function calls, and the end user, I think, like they're diagnosing this, they're trying to follow the line of reasoning, and they're like, wait a minute, can this actual path even occur? Like, is it even feasible given the constraints on the real data coming into the system? And you can see this even in modern programming languages where sophisticated type systems, hard to explain to users, inference-based systems, hard to explain to users. Explaining like unification algorithms to end users seems really, really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, even like we use TypeScript, and even like a fairly straightforward type error, like because the TypeScript types are composable, you can like nest them, and so like even just the type definitions get long to the point of like unreadability, and then you as a human just spend like many minutes just like trying to parse all the brackets and syntax around the type to figure out what's going on. So yeah, there's something to be said around like making things explainable and I guess like crossing the computer human chasm, which I guess maybe gets back to some of the HCI and PL intersection that you were looking into.
Absolutely. And there's actually like, that's a whole active research area in the PL's community, is like explaining errors to people more easily. Many of the type systems out there, like in advanced PL's research, they're quite sophisticated, and sometimes, they end up being impractical because they're incomprehensible.
Unfortunate. Cool. So when you were at Atlasian, you were there for like 5 or 6 years, right?
Yeah, just about that.
So the company grew a good deal. I think you joined. How big was it? It was like around 100.
I think it was around 150, and I think
150.
When I left, it was just prior to IPO. It was around, I think it was several thousand, so 25.
Okay, wow. So that's like a vast amount of growth. What was it like witnessing the kind of growth of Atlasian into this like ubiquitous household name?
It took so long for it to become a household name that it was so interesting for us, because when I joined the company, it was really unknown. Like nobody had ever heard of Atlassian, partly because they were Australian, and partly because they kind of deliberately like went under the radar in many significant ways. They were bootstrapped for a long time. They didn't give out equity to employees for a long time. So, I joined in 2000. I think I joined in 2008, and they didn't give equity until 2010. So I'm not quite sure how they were attracting the caliber of talent they were attracting without the equity piece, but they rectified that, fortunately, for a lot of us early Atlassians. That company, I have nothing but respect for what they built. And it was so incredible to see how they were able to preserve the culture of collaboration from 150 people to the size that they've grown to now. One of the things that I point to is like the company, their products, they dog food their products religiously, and their products were all focused on collaboration. And that meant that collaboration was this incredible superpower within the company. So it was sort of like by dog fooding their products and by practicing what they were selling, preaching, they were able to multiply their own efficiency and create just really great working environments where even as the teams grew and, you were dealing with a lot of siloed organizations, you were still able to work with each other, and the culture they built was incredible. There are things that I take from that culture and try to replicate within LaunchDarkly all the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like everyone I've ever interacted with at Atlasian has just been like a stand-up individual, and they really, really do take their values very seriously. And one of their core values is just like having a really strong, tight-knit culture of collaboration. That's something I've always appreciated about them. I'm curious, did you have kind of an inside view at all with the maybe you'd call it like the somewhat competitive boundary with GitHub? Because these days, I feel like Atlassian, the flagship product is Jira, and Jira is one of those products where it's almost like because it's so successful, you hear a lot of complaints about it, and among developers, it often gets compared to GitHub issues, and Atlassian also has like Bitbucket and Stash, which kind of competes with the GitHub main product. Was that like a thing that loomed large in the mind of Atlassian when kind of GitHub came up during those years, or was the company just like focused on what he was doing and viewed that stuff as a bit of a distraction?
It was a little of both, honestly. There were times in Atlassian's life cycle where there was like a primary competitor that the company was focused on. Like if competition came up, and it didn't often, honestly. Mm-hmm. But when competition did come up, in the early days, it was Fog Creek with Fog Bugs, and then Killing Iran. That was viewed as the primary competitor. There was a famous incident. At the time, it was a big deal to us. I'm sure most of the tech community has never heard of it, but like Joel Spolsky, who was the CEO of Fog Creek, wrote a blog post where he basically was talking about like their product in comparison to their chief competitors, and he was talking about Atlassian. He didn't name them. And he said something like the cart is the wheels are falling off the cart over there. I think that was the phrase he used.
Interesting.
He was
Shots fired.
Yeah, he was trying to say that, like, from a product execution perspective, Atlassian was in a bad situation, and that wasn't true. I'm not sure why he thought it was, but he wrote that, and I think there was like an exchange where, like, we sent Joel like a giant stuffed donkey, like a donkey cart thing. I don't know. We had a donkey in the office, like a stuffed donkey in our office with an Atlassian t-shirt on it for a while. So the early competitor was Fog Creek. And then for various reasons, Fog Creek didn't take off the way, FogBugs didn't take off the way that Jira took off. Won't get into that. But later on, around, I want to say it was 2012-ish, time is, I've been around a while. Where we really felt, we at Atlassian really felt that GitHub was the primary competitor. And this was around GitHub viewing itself as, or being desirous of becoming a collaboration platform for anyone, even outside of software development.
Right. Yeah.
And if you see the direction Atlassian has gone around general purpose collaboration, then you can see why that happened. But for various reasons, that really never took off as a competitive threat to Atlassian.
Yeah. I remember for a while, GitHub was really trying to position itself as, like, not just for developers. There's like a period of maybe 1 or 2 years, maybe around, like, I think this is like fairly early in Sourcegraph too. So like the 2014 or something like that, where you saw a lot of like messaging around like, hey, we're going to get designers involved in this, and like, people from marketing and sales, like, all should learn kind of the GitHub workflow. But I guess that didn't really pan out. And it seems like Atlassian's always come from the side of things of like, let's build general like team collaboration tool, project management, and GitHub has always stayed anchored to more of a developer audience. Would you say that's like more or less true, or is that kind of an oversimplification?
No, I think that is very true. I mean, I think that was very deliberately GitHub's mission for a while. I never worked at GitHub, so I'm certain some listeners might dispute my take on it because I have a limited perspective. But it's interesting because I was recently reviewing GitLab's mission and vision. And they have the same thing stated in their mission and vision, that they want to be, I think their mission is, we're building a platform where everyone can contribute. And when everyone contributes, you create better outcomes. And they even talk about Hollywood directors writing scripts in GitLab. That's in the mission. But I have a really strong suspicion that they're not actually executing towards that.
Yeah, they seem pretty developer focused there from what I can tell.
I think they've really honed in on this, like, one collaboration platform for the software development lifecycle, and they're really building towards that. And maybe it's an artifact that they haven't updated the mission, but when I read that, I was remembering back to the GitHub days and how that played out. My understanding is, like, in the earlier days of GitHub, the legal teams had to write legal documents and submit pull requests.
I'm sure they love that.
And I think there's a kernel of something really interesting there, which is like that whole workflow. We talked about change management earlier.
Yeah.
I think that there is something that will eventually transcend engineering in that workflow. And we've got to figure out ways for other people to benefit from it. Like, I would love HR processes to be like, I could time travel back and look at what an HR process looked like 6 years ago or something like that, or, but that has never transcended developers. There's something about change management that you wish existed, that engineering rigor that you existed outside, and it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, just something beautiful about, like, I can literally go back in time and see every change that anyone ever made to this document or this knowledge base, and I can see precisely who made the change and when, and for whatever reason, it's just that maybe it's that, like, Git is kind of this open source thing. It's viewed as like the standard protocol, whereas the attempts that I've seen outside of the world of developers have largely been proprietary, locked into a particular product. Like Google Docs has a history view, but it's specific to Google Docs, and it in some sense, it feels like an afterthought, not like a first class feature. And of course, you can never take it to some other document editor or system that you're working in.
Yeah, I think there's a ton to unpack there, right? So I think about this in a couple of different ways. Like one, like there's the whole configuration as code movement, and like I really think that that whole space is not really about code. I think it's all about that change management, and it just so happens that we're really good at that change management for things that are expressed as code, specifically as text files. And that goes to the point that you were suggesting, which is that like all the other ways of doing this, since they're not operating on text, they feel very proprietary. It's really interesting. I wonder whether there's going to be something that can unify those things, because like doing everything in text is very limiting in some ways, right? You have no understanding of the semantic structure of anything that you're working with. Like conflict resolution, for example, is reduced to the lowest common denominator. But then we don't really have tools that can work above the level of text, like Git, for example.
Yeah. It's like someone needs to wake up Linus Torvalds from his slumber and get him to write, or maybe the next Linus is out there.
Researcher who's like, you know what, this is all about structured trees, and it's all about ASTs, and we're going to store everything as ASTs, and we just need ASTs for like every DSL out there, and we need to store them in version control and have version control that works on trees. Maybe that's the
my mind reels at the thought of that. That'd be quite the undertaking. Okay, cool. So you were at Atlasian. You saw the company grow from 150 to thousands all the way through IPO. What was kind of the impetus for you to leave Atlasian and start this company, LaunchDarkly?
There's a lot of reasons why I left. And none of them were because I didn't think Atlassian was going to succeed or that it was a bad place to work or anything. It basically boiled down to, for me, like feeling like that in the role that I was in, that there was a lot I was leaving for myself on the table in terms of like my ability to think strategically, to be more of an entrepreneur. I felt limited as an engineering leader at Atlasian, and I knew I could do more. And so I left at a very odd time in my life, in the sense that like I had a 6-month-old daughter. The company was about IPO. Like, on a lot of different levels, didn't make a lot of rational sense. But again, maybe the thread is like I don't necessarily do the most rational things. Like learning to do that first grade is not the most rational decision. But I felt like there was an opportunity. I met my I didn't meet, but I had been working with my co-founder, Edith, for a while, thinking about like building a business together. She's someone that I met in college, back at Harvey Mudd. And, we ended up talking a fair bit and thinking about different ideas. And, one of the things that we realized was like we really had to find something in the intersection of our interest areas, something that she was passionate about, something that I was passionate about. And so developer tools ended up being, the natural space for both of us to focus our energy on. And so that was sort of the start of it. I knew I was going to leave Atlassian. I knew Edith and I were going to start a company together, and it felt like developer tools was the space we were going to do it in.
Awesome. And this was, when did you get started? It was around like 2014?
2014. Yeah.
Okay. And in those days, because developer tools is considered like a hot, quote unquote, hot investment space now. But in those days, it was much less so. Because I remember Sourcegraph got started around the same time, and we could not find for the life of us like an investor to like sit down and listen to. As soon as he said the word, developer tool, they'd be like, oh nope, no money in that. What was it like starting a developer tool company back in 2014?
Yeah. What year did Sourcegraph start?
We're actually mid 2013. So we predate you by about a year or so. Yeah,
I remember this because I thought about applying to you guys. I don't know if
that's awesome.
Yeah, but
I don't remember like chatting with you back then.
No,
did you just,
I was really like stealthily, like I was stalking you guys because I was I was still thinking about static analysis, and I was like, well, who's doing anything interesting in this space? Like, because we had that conversation of like maybe there's going to be a rebirth of this.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe there is, maybe there's somebody doing it and something interesting. And so I stumbled upon you folks, and I thought I followed you for a little while and was like, something might come out of Sourcegraph, and so
Interesting.
there's probably a parallel universe where.
What could have been? You'd have been amazing to work with. I mean, obviously, LaunchDarkly is pretty cool too, but it would have been awesome to geek out about stack analysis and programming languages.
For sure. At any rate, you're right. It was a very different world in 2014, 2015 for companies in our space. I don't think that there were very many successes that you would consider developer tools at that point. Like GitHub hadn't exited yet, right?
Yeah. GitHub was still seen as like a very kind of like high variance, like who knows what will happen.
Yeah, you were looking at like, I don't know, who were the success stories? I think maybe New Relic and companies like that had just gotten to the IPO stage. If you consider them developer tools. And so, it was really hard to find investors. It was really hard to tell the story of what LaunchDarkly was and not get swallowed into like, isn't this just an experimentation tool? One of the things that really helped us, we joined HeavyBit, which for those not aware, HeavyBit is a group of folks that invest primarily in developer tools companies, and they've been doing this for a long time. And they were really, really helpful, not just as early money into LaunchDarkly, but also in helping us shape go-to-market and really be foundational partners as we grew the company. But there weren't many heavy bits around back then. There weren't many companies that really understood the space and had conviction in it.
Yeah. How did you get on the area of like feature toggles and feature flags? Was that something that you kind of knew was a need coming out of Atlasian, or did it take a bit of like user or customer discovery to get to land on that?
Yeah, it did come out of experiences at Atlassian. So a couple of them in particular. The first one was that we'd built an internal feature flagging tool at Atlassian, but it wasn't used by very many teams. And my team was the Atlassian marketplace team. So we built basically what ended up being something like the Apple App Store, but for Atlassian. That's a reasonable analogy. And we ended up wanting to do dark launches. So at Atlasian, they were called dark launches, which I realized later was not a widely used term, which is funny because we named the company before doing that research. But so we wanted to do some dark launches on my team, and we found the platform, the internal platform for doing this at Atlassian. It was really, really painful to use. And it suffered from all of the classic internal tool problems, right? When you build internal tools at a company, you don't really apply the same rigor that you do with customer-facing products. Like you take shortcuts. You don't have PMs. You don't have designers. Just like a bunch of engineers that hack something together to meet the needs of the day. It's often not coupled with a massive like vision around how that investment is going to, what role it's going to eventually evolve into within the company. And that was the case with Atlassian's internal flagging tool. So it felt like there was an opportunity there. And then there was a particular experience that I'd had at one point. We in the San Francisco office, the engineers realized that somebody had listed, there was some bug in the purchasing system, which was homegrown at Atlassian, and it listed Confluence for free. So you could buy Confluence at any license size for free. It was just like listing the price as $0. And I think like 30 licenses had been bought that morning for free. And the website team, which was based in San Francisco, discovered this, and it was a back office system problem. That team was in Sydney. We didn't have an on-call rotation, so we couldn't page them. Their business hours didn't start until 4 p.m., so we had to do something. And so they took Optimizely, which was already installed on the marketing website, and they rolled out an experiment to 100% of the population that just removed Confluence from the cart. And that was the Band-Aid. And, that was I knew a lot of teams that were like hacking Optimizely in that way to like achieve outcomes like that.
Yeah.
You realize that there was an opportunity there because that's not really what the tool was built for.
Yep.
And really what should have happened is the backend change that led to Confluence being listed for free should have been feature flagged, and then somebody could have flipped a feature flag off and rolled back that change without having to redeploy. So those two experiences together were sort of like a bit of the genesis of the idea.
Okay, got it. What were kind of the early days of building the product like? Did you have, who were your first customers, and how did the, I guess, like vision of what you're trying to do change over time?
The first customers were friends and family. We had Edith in particular has an incredibly strong network. It's one of her superpowers, and she'd pitched LaunchDarkly to several of her peers that had started other companies. The first customer that had us live in production was a company called Cherish. They're used furniture, like high-end, like collectible used furniture. And so they put us on their site, and I remember like flipping out because we went from like no traffic at all in the production system to like 6 requests per second, and it like blew my mind. Like I could see in real time.
That's incredible. Yeah.
And so that was nerve-wracking. And we grew from there. We started. I think the first enterprise deal we landed was a company called 10x, auction.com, which renamed to 10x. And the way they found us was something that we were going to see as a repeated pattern in the future. One of their engineering directors had left, I think it was LinkedIn. And at LinkedIn, they'd had a really sophisticated internal platform. He became an engineering director at 10x or auction.com. And he was like, where's my platform that does this? And they were like, that doesn't exist. We have to build our own. And I remember in the first meeting we had with him, he told us, he was like, so I told my engineer, if I Google this and find something, I'm going to be really disappointed in you because I really don't want to build this myself. And so we'd done just enough to SEO. He found us, and
that's awesome.
We landed an enterprise deal with 4 employees with the barest minimum of a platform.
No kidding! Wow. Okay, so you all went straight to enterprise then. You didn't spend too much time on like smaller businesses. It was kind of like
we didn't get a lot of initial traction. Like now it's a thriving part of our business, but the initial signals came from enterprises actually, and that was something that we learned. Is that at the end of the day, tons of people are actually feature flagging. We thought it was sort of like we were going to be in the early adopter. Turned out, no. Like tons of people are feature flagging. They're just doing really, really badly with these awful homegrown systems. So we go into these like really legacy insurance companies, and we'd be displacing this homegrown system that was like, a couple of database tables and a script that some engineer could run to do percentage rollouts. And then we show them what we have, and it would massively change their thinking about what this capability could do for their company.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a very similar experience. We thought we were going to go the, quote, conventional route of starting with SMB and moving our way slowly up market. But for us, it was like the first couple of customers were enterprise too, because those were the ones who felt the need acutely enough that they were willing to be early adopters. And I almost feel like nowadays there's a lot of new dev tools companies springing up, and I feel like a lot of the founders like fixate on individual problems or like targeting SMB, small businesses early because they feel like that's a safer route, or like those organizations are more inclined to be early adopters. But I actually think there's all this evidence that suggests it's actually flipped in DevTools land, where the organizations, maybe not like the super large, tens of thousands of employees organizations, but a lot of like mid-market and enterprise companies actually do want to be early adopters of tooling like this because they just don't want to build it themselves. They reach the point where the code and engineering org is complex enough that they want a tool. They're about to build it in-house, but they would much prefer to buy a best-in-class solution that's battle-tested with a lot of other companies.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think a lot of the hype around PLG kind of obscures the fact that I think to be a successful you have to have multiple motions. Like it's not just going to be $19 credit card charges all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's pretty hard to do for a B2B company. And so we had both motions. We've eventually grown to have both be very, very healthy motions, but the reality is the enterprise motion, the sales touch motion was really like the first place where we were successful.
Yeah. So from an engineering perspective, I imagine that your feature flags and toggles are on the hot path for a lot of critical code, both in terms of volume and if something breaks, it probably takes down. Yeah, like you don't want like an e-commerce site. You're A/B testing something. You don't want a critical revenue generating path to go down. What were some of the engineering challenges that you encountered and overcame along the way in terms of scale and reliability and things like that?
Yeah, I think what people don't realize about feature flagging is they think it's so simple. Is that it's essentially like a giant distributed real-time database. We like the contents of the database are like really, really small bits of JSON. Like that's kind of what we built. And we realized that from an early point on, because we realized like, okay, if we're going to do this as a SaaS, that seems weird because this is critical infrastructure and you don't want to go down and you can't afford to do a remote call. So the first challenge is like, how do you eliminate a remote call when somebody wants to request a feature flag? How do you solve that problem? And we realized, well, it's just dump it in memory, like transmit it over the wire and like put it in memory, and then make the decision locally. So then I was like, all right, the way this is actually going to work is our SDKs are like little interpreters for a very, very specific DSL, which is like the flag targeting, the logic of flag targeting. If the user is in Canada and they've logged in the past 30 days, show them this variation, otherwise show them this variation. That's just an interpreter over a particular script, which is like the user context. Yeah, so that was the first thing we did. Was like, okay, let's treat this as an interpreter. The SDKs are like interpreters, and let's deliver the payload in advance, and then do the evaluation in memory. And so we did that, and that was I think that was one of the fundamental differences between what we were doing and like what A/B testing tools do, where like Optimizely was basically like jQuery injection as a service, right? It was basically like taking, you would visually edit the script, and that was actually just producing a chunk of jQuery that they would then deliver over the wire and then transform the page on the fly. Yeah. We were fundamentally different. We were, living in your code, in your backend or in your client side, and we were executing the flag rules, the targeting rules in line. The next problem that we wanted to solve was like, well, how do we get updates over to you? And so that was initially that was like polling. We're just going to poll back home every 30 seconds. Yep. Turns out polling is really expensive, and it has this awful experience of like you make a change and then you wait and you like refresh the page and like the content changed. Did the feature flag get updated? Is it because the polling didn't complete? And so we were like, how do we make this magical? How do we turn this into like, I change something in the LaunchDarkly dashboard and instantly all of my infrastructure reflects that change? And so we moved into a streaming model where we push the changes over. And that was also challenging because we live in your backend infrastructure. WebSockets aren't really going to work. So we ended up using long-lived HTTPS persistent HTTPS connections, and using a protocol called server-send events to push the changes over. That was a real innovation, really cool. And then the next real hard challenge that we solved was client-side devices, browsers and mobile devices, right? We view them as untrusted contexts. Like they have access in a browser, you can like view source, right? Yep. We don't want to deliver a payload that contains who's getting the flag. Like we don't want if Canada is greater than 50%, give them food. We don't want to deliver that in the payload and make the decision locally, because if you do that, you're revealing information about the like who's getting the flag, who has access to it, business logic to the consumer that shouldn't exist. So we changed the model there, and the way that we changed the model was we pushed the compute to the flag delivery layer, to the like the push model now did a transformation step. So we took the rules, we pushed them to a compute layer that lived closer to the device, like CDN layer or somewhere like that. And then we transformed it for the individual user context. So now when a phone connects to LaunchDarkly, it connects with the individual context for that phone. And now when we deliver the payload, we just deliver the results. So we deliver you get this variation for this flag, this variation for this flag, this variation for this flag. And the hard part about that is like if you change a feature flag, you have to push that change to like millions of clients and have that all that computation happen for every individual client context. And so that's really expensive. Before we solved that problem, we were ending up in situations where like some of the big e-commerce customers would like change a flag, and like our entire infrastructure would like gasp,
just kind of percolate.
Yeah, it'd just be like, oh god, I've got to deliver a flag change to like multiple devices, and we couldn't keep up with the load. And so it took us a while to optimize that to the point where now we can handle all of that scale, and it's just all very elastic and globally distributed.
That's fascinating. So I guess like at a high level, the problem that you're trying to solve is you want sort of a centralized dashboard to be able to change behaviors in applications, but those applications live, wherever in the world, on phones, in people's browsers, on many different clients.
Yeah, on the service.
And you want to be able to like give people the capability, like, oh, I'm going to turn this off and on, and have that broadcast out as quickly as possible, and also for there to be limited impact on the latency on all the clients. Is that
exactly
kind of the interesting?
That's a really hard problem to solve. It's one that took us a while to solve, but now you change a feature flag in LaunchDarkly. It's the change is streamed out to servers, mobile devices, browsers at pretty arbitrarily large scale within like quarter of a second or less.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And can you use it? So it's software as a service. So if you have a cloud application, it obviously works. Can you also use it for self-hosted applications, or is there like a self-hosted version of LaunchDarkly that's deployable, or does it all talk to kind of the central?
No, it's all
center?
Cloud. So you still have to phone.
Got it.
You still have to connect to LaunchDarkly, but we have different connection patterns that can kind of eliminate that or reduce that need. Like we have a thing called the relay proxy, which is it's basically a Go microservice that's open source that you can stick in your own infrastructure that can disconnect you from LaunchDarkly and act as a middleman. Looks to our SDKs, it looks just like LaunchDarkly. It's making all the same network interactions, but it's not connected to LaunchDarkly. And so then once you divorce, your infrastructure from LaunchDarkly via this proxy, then you can decide how you want change sent to that proxy. So if you change something on your dashboard, you can say, okay, I'm going to, push that out as a file, and I'm going to put a file in a location, and then my relay proxy will pick up that change and distribute it to my infrastructure, for example.
Cool. That's super cool. I guess like last thing I would love to cover is the impact of using feature flags on developer experience. So you've at this point worked with like many different organizations, helping them like integrate feature flags and feature toggles into their application. For me personally, when we started using them at Sourcegraph, I found that it kind of changed the way that we did development. It enabled some things that were just like not possible before. It made certain things just like much easier. When you've kind of witnessed how feature flags have impacted development teams at all your customers, are there any like big themes or like patterns or cool use cases that you kind of discovered that are like noteworthy or perhaps even surprising to you?
All of those things. Like the impact has been transformational in a way that I wouldn't have anticipated. We see teams where like the vast majority of the change they push out is protected by a feature flag. And that to me is like an indication that we've actually fundamentally transformed their software development practices. That's really cool. We also see use cases that go beyond just the sort of like, I want to mitigate risk by rolling this out, which is, obvious and still like, the most common use case. We also see obviously experimentation, right? Like once you have two different variations, you have a control and an experiment. And so the natural thing to do is to do an A/B test. But I think that understanding of like, oh, it's for feature launches or it's for A/B tests is quite limiting. And we see a bunch of additional use cases that go well beyond that. Things like long-term control. So one of the cool feature flags that we have in LaunchDarkly, I think we've talked about this publicly a few times, is we rate limit our APIs via feature flag. And so the way that works is we have rules set up that apply different rate limits based on the customer or the route they're hitting or previous behaviors. So for example, I can say simple things like mutative requests like patch or post or delete. They're more expensive on our infrastructure, so they should be rate limited, at this rate as opposed to that rate. Or maybe there'll be a time of duress where we see some particular customers stretching us, our own infrastructure in a way that we hadn't anticipated. Like they'll start slamming a particular route that we never anticipated anybody slamming. And so we can just rate limit that one customer super easily with LaunchDarkly and have that impact be rolled out instantaneously. And we'll go from like incident level to like not incident in a quarter of a second or something like that.
Interesting. So it's almost like you have this general purpose, like command and control dashboard for your application, where you can toggle all these behaviors without like going through the whole like cycle of like pushing up a patch, like waiting for CI to pass and like updating the application. It's just like you go to this dashboard where you toggle a behavior on and off. That's super cool.
It's like a couple of different ways to think about it. One is like it's almost like you can parameterize certain aspects of your code and dynamically change those parameters without redeploying your application. So you can then tune those parameters if you need to. Another way of thinking about it is like you can pull business logic out of source code because we have a fairly expressive targeting language. It's like any kinds of conditionals, different operators like starts with, ends with, regular expression matching. So essentially you can pull business logic out of code and put it in a dynamically manageable layer, right? So like I can change pricing plans. I can add a new feature to a pricing plan by just turning it on in LaunchDarkly, giving access to a particular customer or a particular segment of customers in the LaunchDarkly dashboard.
That's super cool. Cool. So we're about at the end of time here, but before we head out, if folks are listening to this and want to give LaunchDarkly a try, what's the best way to do that?
LaunchDarkly.com. So yeah, like I said, we have plans that work for anybody from small startup, 2-person shop, all the way up to Fortune 100 companies. We actually have like over 30% of the Fortune 100 count themselves as LaunchDarkly customers. So any size team, really. Go to LaunchDarkly.com. You can get started. And I think one of the most amazing things about feature flagging and LaunchDarkly in particular is like you talk about all of the like ways to improve your development teams, and like quantitatively you can show that feature flags have a massively positive impact on things like mean time to remediation, like incident remediation times, developer productivity, but at the same time, like unlike a lot of other things that can do that, there's really no prerequisites that you need to have in place. Like you can get started feature flag. You don't need to have Kubernetes. You don't need to have like, a service mesh or some complicated architecture or like a massive investment in like integration tests and testing harnesses. You can just add feature flagging to your workflow in a very simple way if you're a small team very easily. It's one of the most powerful and beautiful things about it.
Awesome. Well, my guest today has been John Kodumal, CTO of LaunchDarkly. John, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.